Hi, everybody. My name is Kelsey Daniluk. I am the coordinator for Campus Community Awareness Programs. I coordinate any activity that falls under a grant that we received for the prevention of dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. So, obviously, this work is my passion. I really care about making a difference on this campus, and I know that you all do too. So, today we're going to go over ways that we can prevent these things from happening on our campus and also some ways that we can respond appropriately when it does happen. I have with me my friend and colleague Mike Strong to help me go over some of these things.
Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, my name is Mike. I serve as the Dean of Students and also a Deputy Title IX Coordinator here at the University of Akron. And just for the interim, I'm also serving for a time being as the interim Title IX Coordinator while the university finds someone to fill that spot permanently. But today we're talking, as Kelsey had mentioned, about bystander intervention. I'm super excited, so we're going to jump right in.
So you might see this presentation is called Be an Empowered Zip. And what does it mean to be an empowered zip? Well, it's a couple different things. But one big thing is being an active bystander. So when it comes to seeing a situation that might be dangerous or might just look a little bit sketchy for some reason, you can either see it happening and then ignore it, carry on with your day. You don't really do anything about it. We all have barriers that we need to overcome, and in a couple minutes, we're going to be going over some of those barriers. However, most of the time, we really want you to be an active bystander. And what this means is when you see something happening, you do something about it. And we're also going to be going over some of the ways that you can intervene safely so that you can make sure you're looking out for yourself and your fellow zips.
So thanks, Kelsey. Let's go ahead and jump in and start talking about those barriers. I know when you were talking about bystander intervention, that's one of the things that jumped out at me. And so we tend to think about barriers in different categories. Maybe can we start with personal barriers and have you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we all have different personalities and preferences and ways that we like to handle conflict. And personal barriers are definitely a big reason people might not want to intervene. For example, you might be introverted. I know personally, my friends always call me a turtle because if there's any kind of conflict, I retreat into my shell. And you might be that way too. You might have a fear of retaliation, whether that be from an institution you're a part of, or from your friend group, or from your partner. Maybe you just don't wanna make a scene. Sometimes we see something happening and it might seem kind of minor, and we're afraid that if we get involved, now it's going to be a big thing that we're a part of. And there's a ton of other ones that we could list, but those are a few that I wanted to start with, and those are a few that are relatively easy to overcome once we kind of get into those techniques for intervening.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, Kelsey, before we move on, I just want to touch on because I heard about fear of retaliation, and so one of the things I just want to be real clear about the university, we're not going to prohibit retaliation, but then also to be modest and also true, there may be some circumstances where the retaliation that they're fearing might not come from the university, it might be from outside, and so that's still a very real thing. But one thing that, as you talked about, we're going to talk more about as we think about intervention.
Yeah. So then we do have other kinds of barriers. We also have social barriers that can play a role in intervening. So I don't know if you have any ideas on what that might be and you want to share some of that.
Sure. Well, I think of a classic, not wanting to be a snitch, or also, what if the person that you need to be able to talk with, what if they're a friend or you have a good relationship? Um, yeah, it can be hard, and sometimes we might even just rely on others. We might think that there's more than I'm not the only person here. Someone else might be able to step in and take care of this. And the difficulty there is if everyone sits on the sideline and waits for someone else to be able to step forward or even have the conversation about who's going to step forward, we can get caught in a feedback loop and never move forward.
Right, right, yep. And again, those are all barriers that we'll kind of talk about how we can maybe overcome them through some of the techniques for intervention.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure there's other barriers as well, but we're going to stop there because, right, like Kelsey, you and I know we both, um, we care deeply about breaking through those barriers and breaking them down. But there's a lot of work to be able to do there. So, but in interest, let's move forward, and let's talk about different methods for intervening.
So, before we really get into what the three Ds are, I want to emphasize a couple things. First is that it, bystander intervention is not always super easy. It's not always oh, this is exactly what I need to do. It's going to depend on your preferences, your barriers, and how comfortable you are overcoming some of those, and what's going to work best in that situation. Sometimes you might have to try different methods, you might have to combine them. But at the end of the day, what I really want to emphasize is that no matter how you intervene, you are doing it safely. We want to be sure that you're safe while also keeping others safe. So, for example, one of the first D's is to be direct. This could be direct with the potential perpetrator or the potential victim. So going up and just saying like, "Hey, knock that off. I don't like what you're doing. You're going to hurt somebody," or asking the potential victim, "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Can I help you get away from this situation?" That's a great method. It's very direct, takes care of the problem, but it might not always be the safest, especially if you're alone. And, we talked about maybe you're introverted and you don't like conflict. And that's when that would make a lot of people uncomfortable if you have that type of personality. In that case, you could maybe use delegate instead, or sometimes it's called the team approach. So you could pull in somebody to help you, maybe gather some friends and say, "Hey, I don't like this situation. Let's tackle this together." Or delegating it out to somebody who may be better equipped to handle it. For example, if you're at a bar, pulling in the bartender for help. If you're at some kind of club, you can ask the bouncer for help. If you're just out and about and you see something happening and it seems really dangerous, the best person to delegate to is UAPD or calling 911. And lastly, you could use distraction. This is my personal favorite because you can get really creative with it. And like I said, I don't like conflict. And this is a really good way to intervene, sometimes without people even realizing what you're doing. So you just distract from the situation so that everybody can get out of there safely. For example, if you're at a party, you can maybe start a dance off. I've heard that example a lot. You could spill a drink that you think has been drugged, or you could tell somebody that their car is being towed so that they leave and that victim can get out of there safely. So, like I said, there's a lot of different ways you could distract or be direct or delegate, but the important thing is that you are comfortable and you are safe.
Kelsey, as I'm listening to you talk about those different, wait, I think we call those the three Ds, right? The three
Mhm.
different methods to be able to intervene. I think about how would that actually work in a real life scenario. So, can we think of sometimes where we might have to have someone intervene?
Yeah, so one example would be you're at a bar, you notice a young woman sitting at the bar who looks very drunk. The man next to her keeps buying her drinks as she gets more and more intoxicated, and maybe he's not drinking as much.
Got it. Got it. Well, maybe if you're out to eat with a friend and a group of people nearby start making sexual gestures or comments to one of your friends, and like they're sitting right next to you and you're trying to be able to ignore the comments, but you see your friend starting to get upset.
Yeah, yep, I've definitely seen that happen. Another student in your class maybe starts talking about a recent high profile rape case, blames the victim for what happened, maybe saying something like, "Well, women just say that when they have sex that they regret."
Okay. Or, I could imagine maybe you're out dancing with a group of friends. A young woman joins your circle of dancers and begins to monopolize one of your friends' attention, and it gets really loud, so you can't really hear what they're saying to each other. And maybe she moved in, and the way you're seeing on your friend's face, um, cutting your friend off from the rest of the group, not able to really engage with people, and you might be uncomfortable.
And one, specific to college students who might be staying in a residence hall, you might see a couple stumbling down the hallway. Maybe their hands are all over each other in a clearly sexual way. But then a few minutes later, you hear a struggle and then loud voices and yelling coming from the room that they're in.
Hey, Kelsey, when I think about these scenarios, these seem like they could be scenarios that any student may face, or some of them anyone could face. But I'm curious if you've had any experiences with Bystander that you'd like to share. And maybe we can start by just letting me share something that I went through and get your thoughts and feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, sounds good. So Kelsey, I want to tell you about, actually it's a while ago. It's back when I was younger. I was just going into my freshman year of high school, so it's some time. But during the summer, I went to camp, and one of the responsibilities, or one of the things we did during the camp, was visit nursing homes. It was kind of a mission to be able to go out and help people in the community, and in order to make sure that we were safe, and also help keep us on schedule and getting a chance to be able to interact with folk, we went out in pairs. So I was paired with a student. She was a senior in high school, and we had just met at camp, so we didn't know each other that well, but we were becoming friends. And when we were out, there was one day we were, it was in northern Wisconsin. We had been in a nursing home for, oh shoot, it had been about 3 hours. So we had already, stopped by and talked about 10 different individuals, visit and chat, see how they were doing. But the last room we went into, and it was right before we were ready to leave. I remember standing in the door. I was tired at that point, and and she got called over by the resident, and so she went over, and he asked to be able to give her a hug, and so she gave him a hug, and I thought nothing of it. We talked a little bit further, but all of his attention was pointed to her, and that the man in the nursing home, he was, I don't know, to look at him, must have, I'm guessing, had been 75 or 80 years old. So he was pretty old. And I really wasn't ready or expecting, or even really in a place to be able to understand what happened next, because he had called her over again. And then when she was, visiting him and leaned over to give him a hug, he grabbed her, and uh, I saw her jump. Um, and then afterwards, she immediately turned and left, and I didn't even understand what was going on at that point. Um, but what happened next has hung with me and stuck with me a little bit, because after we were out in the hall, I went up and I asked her, what happened, and she told me that she had been assaulted, and she told me that she had been assaulted before, and that was hard. And I was young. I didn't know. I didn't know what I should say. I didn't know. I don't even think I knew how I looked. And I'm afraid I just had kind of like a flat face, and no response. And that, just not ready or not able uh, to be able to have a kind word, to be able to share that's hung with me a little bit.
Mike, I first want to say thanks for, sharing your story, especially when you share a story that you might see as, oh, I did something wrong. I know that takes a lot of bravery, but you did say something, along the lines of you just didn't even know what was happening. You didn't know what to do. And that's why we do these presentations, is because I never got an education like this either. So looking back, I have a lot of stories like this where I think, oh man, I wish I could go back and do this differently. And now that we have kind of talked about this, we've talked about the 3Ds, we've talked about the barriers. I guess I'm curious, if you could go back, what would you do differently?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Kelsey. Because that's one that hangs with you a little bit. But I absolutely would want to be able to have a kind word, something prepared, something ready, to be able to know what I should say, and to be able to know that it's okay to be able to apologize. Not that I did something wrong, but that I didn't want for my friend to be able to be in that position. And I think it would have been natural and appropriate for me to say I'm sorry, and then to be able to think about, well, what can we do? What do we need to do? That was still before I knew, but no one else knew, and that was before she would have had an opportunity to be able to think about who else does she want to know, and how can we plan that conversation out. So with a little bit more hindsight and a lot of bit more training, I think that's where I would go now. Kelsey, I'm kind of curious. Do you have a story that you'd like to share?
I do, yes. So my bystander intervention story, this happened a couple years ago. So I was already a few years into doing this work, so I kind of knew what to look out for. I was probably too hyper aware at times, just based on the work that I do. Um, but I sort of had a little bit of an idea of what to do, which was really cool. And I felt like I made a difference in somebody's life, and that's a really good feeling. So my boyfriend and I were bored one night, um, and we thought, well, let's go get some snacks at the store. So we went to Walmart and we parked close to a Jeep that a young girl got out of. Very young teenager, just wearing like a big sweatshirt and shorts, as people do very late at night when they run to the store for snacks. Um, and immediately, an employee of Walmart came up to her and was just walking with her through the parking lot, making comments about what she was wearing and how good she looked and how he really wanted her phone number so they could meet up. And he was also significantly older than her, and she just looked uncomfortable. So we made sure to stay close and listen to things, make sure it didn't get any worse. Eventually, he kind of branched off as soon as she walked into the store, but my boyfriend said to me, that does not sit with me. Something about this interaction is just really off. I don't feel like she's going to be safe getting back to her car. I think we need to do something. I agreed, but he pointed out, she's being made uncomfortable by an adult man. And he said, me being an adult man, I don't think I'm the best person to approach this. And I thought that was a really good insight that he had. It was that moment where he wanted to be direct, but he didn't feel like it would be not necessarily unsafe, but he didn't think it would be comfortable for her. And that was a really good point that he made. So I said, all right, let's take the team approach. Why don't you kind of hang out by the door, see what that guy is doing? And I'll go up to her and just let her know that we saw what was happening and ask if she needs help. So I found her in the store. I kind of explained to her who I was and said, my boyfriend and I parked near you. We kind of noticed this interaction. Did that make you uncomfortable? And she said, oh my gosh, yes. And we said, okay, can I walk you out to the car? I do have my boyfriend with me. Would you be comfortable with both of us walking into your car to make sure you're safe? And she said yes. And that's exactly what we did. The guy had been hanging out by the exit, and we suspect that he probably was trying to find her again to, walk her to her car, which could have been really unsafe for her. Um, so I was glad that we were able to be there for her in that moment. And like I said, we kind of had to take that moment to talk about our plan and realize, okay, a potential barrier here is she's going to be uncomfortable with who's now approaching her to potentially help, but she doesn't know that. So how do we get around that barrier? Well, let's take a different approach. And sometimes you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to try different things. And sometimes it's okay to just ask that person, do you need help? And what's the best way for me to do that for you?
That's really cool. Kelsey, when I was listening to you talk, I was just really impressed about how thoughtful you could be on the fly, right? Sometimes when we think about these things, you think about it, sounds like there's a whole game plan that's required. And I'm curious if that was all in the moment or if your training had helped with that. What do you think?
You know, the idea for how to intervene was all in the moment. I do want to point out, you do not have to be a professional. You don't have to have advocacy experience. You don't have to, work for a university. Anybody can be an active bystander and get involved. My training had nothing to do with it at that point, except for me maybe recognizing some red flags. But even those red flags, I think, are pretty recognizable. You can tell when somebody's uncomfortable. I will say what helped me in that moment was having some credentials to maybe back it up and tell her what I did for a living. But other than that, anybody could have helped in that moment. My training didn't really have that much to do with it.
Yeah. Well, there have been times in my life where someone has stopped me and be able to ask, "Hey, do you need some help or how's it going?" And every time without fail, whether or not I'm having a good day or a bad day, I greatly appreciate that. That's the world I want to live in. So, thank you for helping us make that happen. But, all right. So we talked a little bit about that bystander intervention, but I do want us to be able to circle back and think about how it is that we can be responsive and supportive when someone we care about, whether or not it's a friend or someone in one of our organizations that we're working with, if they disclose or report to us that they've been subject to sexual harassment or stalking, dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, any of those behaviors. Um, so, Kelsey, can you help us understand that a little bit in better detail?
So before we really get into what to do if somebody tells you that they are in an unhealthy or abusive relationship or they've been sexually assaulted or harassed. We kind of have to understand what that victim might be going through at that time. So, first, it's important to acknowledge that you might be feeling a lot of things in this moment. It can be scary. You can feel frustrated. You can feel hurt for this person that you care about because they had to go through something like this. And you might think, oh, I know how I would handle this, or I know how I'd react and how I'd want somebody to help me. But it's important to remember that your responsibility is to that person disclosing at that time. So you have to acknowledge how they're feeling and what might be best for them in that moment. This isn't to say that your feelings don't matter, because I still want to emphasize that you need to take care of yourself. Even just hearing these stories and trying to help somebody can be incredibly stressful and difficult. So you still have to acknowledge your feelings, let yourself feel them, and practice some self care later, no matter what that might be. However, in that moment, you need to focus on what that person might be feeling. It's also important to remember that all situations are unique. You might have helped somebody before and you found that referring them to a counselor was helpful for them. That doesn't mean that that's going to be helpful for this person. Each person is unique, each situation is unique, and everybody's path to healing is unique. So just keep that in mind. Now, I want to get into common reactions of survivors. And I really need to point out that this is a very, very, very small list out of a number of things that somebody might be feeling after they've been a victim of something. However, these are some of the most common, um, and there's kind of reasons for why people might be feeling this way. So, a victim might feel a sense of betrayal, and a sense of loss of control, and a sense of loss of trust. So, this is because a lot of times victims know their perpetrator. So 80% of victims know the person who hurt them. That can obviously make you feel like, well, who can I trust? I thought this person was my friend, was my coworker, was my partner who loved me, and now they're the one who hurt me. So a lot of people might be a little bit hesitant to trust you to help them. It's important to, respect that and not take it too personally and understand where that might be coming from. They also might feel a lot of guilt and shame. This is because victim blaming is a prevalent issue in our society. Victims might feel like they did something wrong because society tells them that they did something wrong. They shouldn't have been wearing that. They shouldn't have been out so late, shouldn't have been drinking that much. Truth is, there is nothing that anybody can do to deserve what happened to them. And chances are that victim is already blaming themselves a lot and have internalized a lot of things. So there's no reason for anybody else to be blaming them, so just keep that in mind as well. And lastly, they might be feeling some fear and disbelief. Why did this happen to me? I thought I did everything right. And like I said, there's nothing that anybody can do to deserve this, and there's no right way to act to avoid, this kind of thing happening. So, like I said, this is a very small list of feelings. Um, and I want to point out too that some people might not feel any of this. Some survivors just feel a lot of numbness and don't express a lot of emotion, and that's okay too. What's important is to acknowledge those feelings and let them know that however they're reacting and however they're feeling is completely normal.
Kelsey, as I'm listening to you talk, I really appreciate the attention that's being paid towards understanding where that person who's just shared something so difficult, where they may be coming from. So I think about having good concrete tools, knowing what I would do if that person was talking to me. And so I think about 4 easy steps to validate, to empower, to listen, and to refer. And when you think about those things, it can almost feel like, you know what, I'm not really doing a lot. But if you're taking the time to be able to help someone understand what they're going through is real and authentic, and it matters not just to them, but it matters to you because you're with them, that validation, I think, is really important. When you were talking, Kelsey, about how someone could feel as though they were betrayed, I think that the importance of being able to put them back in a position of power. So empower them to be able to figure out what their next choices are, and to have the patience to be able to listen, so that you know. where they're going and you're able to follow their lead and help them find that. And then also to also humbly always know that with more time and preparation, there are others on this campus or in this community who can help. So referral is always going to be important there. And through all of that, there are some helpful things that we know that we should be saying. I'm going to start with, thank you for trusting me. Someone shares or discloses something that's so sensitive and personal, we should be able to acknowledge that and thank them for choosing us, for trusting us. I think it's also always helpful to say it's not your fault. When you really think about that one, and Kelsey hit this one, you hit this one nail on the head. How can someone else be, how can you be responsible for someone else's behavior, right? It's not your fault. It's not. I'm sorry that this happened. And to ask a really important question, right? What can I do to help?
Mike, what I really like about the things that you pointed out we could say that could be helpful to somebody going through this is that it's all very simple things to say and anybody can do it and make an impact. And the same thing can be said about the things that we should leave unsaid. Is that these are all things that, people might want to say or they might think would be best, but they're really not. And you don't need any training to keep these out of the situation. So, first, don't ask what were you wearing? Why were you there? How much did you have to drink? These all play into that victim blaming that I pointed out earlier. These are probably things that the victim has already asked themselves and wouldn't make a difference to the situation anyway. So there's no point in saying it. Asking why didn't you call the police? Hindsight's always 2020. You never know what would have been best to do in that situation, and you can't go back and change any of it. So again, no point in really asking it. Same thing with if I were you, I would blank, call this person, do this, respond this way because you're not the one in that situation. This person is, and they know what's best for them more so than you would. Really, my rule of thumb is it's better to just not ask any questions unless that question is, what can I do to help you? Really quickly, I want to go over a couple helpful resources. Um, Now, these resources can be accessed by the person who has gone through this trauma, or it can also be accessed by the person who is trying to help. I know sometimes it can be difficult to know what to say, and it can be difficult to know, how to process what's happening, even if you're somebody who's offering support. So, the Hope and Healing 24/7 hotline is a really good resource for that. Anybody can call them and get any kind of support 24/7. It is completely free and available to you. And they also do have an office on campus in the Rec and Wellness Center, 246. It's best to still kind of call that hotline first to be sure that they're there. But if you prefer to speak to an advocate in person, that's also available to you on campus. We also have the Counseling Center, UAPD, and the Akron General PATH Center. I want to point out one thing about the PATH Center. This is where you can get a forensic medical exam or a rape kit done following a sexual assault. This is a good way to collect evidence that could be used later if you decide to pursue any kind of charges or file a report. Um, Now, this can be accessed by calling the Hope and Healing hotline. So, feel free to do that. An advocate can meet you there, or you can just show up there. An advocate can meet you there in that way as well. But this is a really good resource for our community, and we're super lucky to have it. They have trained nurses who specifically work with sexual assault victims, so they know exactly how to handle these kinds of cases. Lastly, I want to point out this report equals support on the side here. Sometimes people think that making a report makes you a snitch, like Mike pointed out earlier, as a barrier to intervention, but it's really just a good first step for getting the support that somebody might need. The way to do that is to go to uakron.edu/help, and you can see some of these resources and also make a report online.
Kelsey, as I'm listening to you talk, I just want to also be able to say thank you for your attention today, and thanks to everyone who's listening. The topic and the content, the stuff we're working with today, it requires support of an entire community for us to be able to get to where we'd like to be. Also, I want to make sure that you have some ways to be able to connect. So follow us on at uAkronSave on Instagram or on Facebook at uAkronSave. And then also you can check out the University of Akron SAVE Team website. SAVE stands for Sexual Assault and Violence Education Team, a group of students, faculty, and staff from across campus who are working to be able to make this environment safe for every student here and every faculty and staff member here.
Right. If anybody has any additional questions or you want any more details on anything that we've covered today, here's how you can contact us. Please don't hesitate to do so. We are more than happy to talk to you more about this stuff.
Yeah, I'd just like to be able to add there's no questions too big or too small. We're happy to answer them all. And we also greatly appreciate answering a question on behalf of a friend or in a hypothetical situation as well. It's often a safe way to go. So, but with that, hey, thanks for your time and attention again. Take care and have a great day. Bye now.